Assalamu alaikum, my very dear brothers and sisters. What I'm going to try and do in this series of lectures, in a way it will be a simplified version of a course that I run during the week, which is 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, which is 20 hours a week, as opposed to this will be about 4 hours a week. So it will be about 20%, I think, of the material. And so obviously I won't be able to go into the level of depth in this that I would go in otherwise in the daily courses. We don't have them available yet, but it might be possible that many of you would like to have a book of source material that was written at a much higher level than these talks will be, and that form the basis for my daytime classes and during the week. There are two. It is called Unified Theory of Existence, Volume 1, which is essentially the science and the cosmology of the nature of our existence, how we came to be, our relationship to God, how light is related to God, how the physical developmental progression of matter took place, how the development of biological life took place. All of that would be in this volume. And Volume 3, which is also called Unified Theory of Existence, is I would say probably the most complete explanation of the laws of learning, or how human learning takes place, that has been written. The reason that I say that is because this is my particular area in psychology that I spent 13.5 years as a full-time university student studying, and I read all of the various texts that if you were to take a class, it would be called operant learning theory, and it would be so simplistic compared to what is in here. That would be like a primer compared to a standard 1 or 2 primer compared to a Form 6, 5 or 6 book. I mean, it's a very, very deep understanding of how learning takes place. So we will get some more made up, unfortunately, because we have to have them photocopied. The actual photocopy cost is about 20 ringgit to get one made, so that is what we'll charge for it, for those who want them, and we'll have some available next week. If we could print them, if we had time to print them, of course they would be much cheaper, but we're not going to have time to do that. Now, what this class is really about is I am going to try and give you information during this class, which is actually more than give you information. To be honest, I'm going to try and convince you of something. And I'm going to try and convince you that there is a real way to make the world the kind of place that Allah wants it to be. So I want you to judge all of these things that I'm saying. You know, it doesn't matter, I don't even bother to say what all famous universities I've been at and what degrees I've got and things like that, because that doesn't really matter for anything. You know, I could have all those and know nothing, or I could have none of those and know a lot. I mean, so basically what you need to judge this on is what I say, does it sound reasonable? Does it sound true? Is it consistent with Islam? And does it all fit together? And a very important part of it, of this test, is does it all fit together? This is why it is called the Unified Theory of Existence. It is a body of knowledge where all the parts fit together. The reason I am actually doing a class like this, I probably you know, Allah steps in occasionally and just changes direction in your life. And last year, Allah stepped in and changed the direction of my life drastically. I thought, I mean, actually many of you in here I know, so you already know. I don't want to bore you with this story, but about June of last year, when I thought I had a sore back from an auto accident I had many years ago, and I went in and had an x-ray to see if there was something, a problem with a nerve in my spine, I found out that I had a tumor in my lung. And it turned out to be a tumor that is a particular type of cancer that is always fatal. And it is actually quickly fatal. You know, if you look on the internet and you look on the American Cancer Society or other things, they say average 4 or 5 months. This was June of last year. And this is about 9 or 10 months later, and you know, I'm still giving talks. And at the end of December, I went in for some more tests, and the tests were really, really discouraging. You know, the tumor was growing significantly, and the cancer on my spine had gone from 1 place to about 8 places. And the doctor said that probably I would only be able to at least be working until March or April. But I think I'm going to make it longer than March and April, as good as I feel now. I mean, all things considered, I feel good. But you've got to consider the position that I find myself in. I have spent almost 40 years devoting my life to one particular area of study. Not just the laws of learning and how to apply them, but I have been devoting my time. We'll just wait for a second till everyone can find a seat, because there is a thing called sensory gating which takes place, which I'll describe later when we talk about learning. Because human beings we are only good at paying attention to one thing at a time. So after spending about 40 years, essentially, I mean, it sounds like a grandiose plan to have 40 years ago, but 40 years ago, something happened when I was studying psychology that convinced me that there was a tool available that was so powerful that we could literally use it to change the world and make the world a right place. And of course, 40 years ago, the world wasn't a very nice place either. And now it's a worse place than it was then. And so I was, even though I wasn't a Muslim then, I was very socially concerned. And so I thought, well, I am going to try and find a way to use this tool to help the world become a better place, this tool of knowledge of the laws of learning. So then I worked 40 years on it, because as you'll find out later, there's more than just the tool. There's a lot I had to learn. So I spent 40 years doing that, and I get it really just ready to go. And I just start to slowly start implementing it, and the government hired me to implement it, and the government works a bit slow. They're nice enough, but they're a bit slow to work with sometimes. And I thought I was in really excellent health, and I thought probably got at least 20, 30 years left at the health that I'm at. And then I find probably at very most I have 1. So the reason that this is the reason that I am talking to you about this is because one of the things, there's not so much I can really do. I can't write wouldn't even really do that much good if I wrote another book, because as you can see, we are videotaping this, and we videotape all of my weekly talks. And if I were to write a book, it might take me a year to write a book. But by these talks that I'm giving, these 4-hour-a-day talks, 5 days a week, if we do that for 3 months as is planned, that would come out, the total number of hours, if transcribed into books, would come out into about 35 books. And so what I'm trying to do is, in this last whatever time Allah gives me, transfer as much of the knowledge that I have gained in those 40 years as possible to a group of people in general, and to have it down on videotape and then transcribed into books. So I actually do have an opportunity to leave my life work. And I think to myself, how blessed I am by Allah that I find out that I have time to do this, rather than I could have just got hit by a truck or something out on the street, and 40 years worth of work would have just disappeared. So that is basically the plan. And why I'm doing these weekend talks is because I am hoping that some of you will be convinced enough that these ideas are good, they are workable, they're consistent with Islam, and they offers an opportunity to make the world that Allah really planned for us to have, not the terrible world that exists out there now, and that you will actually do something with the knowledge. And the more people that have access to this knowledge, the more likely it is that it will continue after I'm gone. So that's why I'm here talking to you. I don't know exactly where to start with this. There is a hypothesis which I came up with many years ago. And a hypothesis is where you say, I think such and such is true, and then you go ahead and try and, I'll say you try and prove it's true, which is not really actually the scientific method. You actually try and prove it is untrue. But people don't understand it. They don't understand the scientific method, so I'll just say you try and prove it is true. And this hypothesis was this, as I looked at the world, and I'll tell you why I thought this later, but that if you were to give any individual or social group two things, one, a positive and accurate and motivational worldview. In other words, if you gave people a way to see the world that was positive and accurate and motivational, which I now believe to be Islam understood scientifically and logically, plus a good understanding of learning by which all human characteristics develop, that individual or social group would move naturally and inevitably toward everything good and right. So that is the hypothesis behind this. So these two books are basically those two parts, although I wrote them so long ago that I would have to upgrade them to make them totally consistent with Islam. But they are very close to totally consistent with Islam. Even the knowledge that I came to, basically all the knowledge in these books is why I ended up finally being a Muslim. And I did, by the way, start out as one of the most confirmed atheists you could possibly imagine. So totally convinced not only that God did not exist, but to believe in God and to be a member, to practice a religion was harmful to the future of the human race and was holding us back. And that I used to actually even give public talks about how naive it was to believe in God. And to a large university class once of about 500 students, once made the claim that so thankful I was incorrect, that if there was ever going to be the last person in the whole world who believes in God, it would be me. And you know, so I'm not quite sure whether I'm most shocked to believe in God or to end up being a Muslim. Because having grown up in America, Islam certainly would have been my last choice. You know, and I barely even, after I finally did come to know that God existed, you notice I don't say believe that God existed, but I say know God existed, because it came through objective knowledge of science. When I was looking for religion, I almost didn't bother to have a look at Islam, having been so brainwashed in the United States against the possibility of Islam having anything to offer. So here I am, 24 years or so a Muslim, and with an idea which I think I can say this truthfully, that virtually everything I tell you, I mean, there's going to be a few things I'm probably wrong about. It's just the reality of the world. You know, my knowledge is not perfect. So probably I'm in error in a few things that I'll tell you. But basically, everything that I'm going to tell you, although I'll be speaking almost entirely from a scientific language, will be consistent with Islamic knowledge. And this is something that I have found more and more over the years, that all these things that I thought were new ideas, I find them somewhere or other in early Islamic scholarship. But just said very, very differently. Now, we all know that the world right now, today, has many, many terrible problems. And I think if you were to ask most people in the world, is there a solution to those problems? I think most people are going to say no. Particularly if you ask outside the Muslim Ummah. As Muslims, we at least acknowledge that Allah gives us an opportunity if we would take that opportunity. But outside the Islamic Ummah, I would say most people just don't have much hope. And this is one of the things that is happening with young people in the world, that hope is really disappearing. And once hope disappears, there's really not a lot of reason to do a whole lot of things. You know, there's not much reason to study in school. There's not much reason to be good to people. There's not much reason to plan for a future. There's not much reason to stay away from drugs and alcohol. You might as well just do whatever you're going to do, because the world's just going to keep getting worse. And when you look at the complexity of the problems of the world, it's not hard to see why people might think that it is a problem that could not be solved. I mean, many governments in the world, including the Malaysian government, I would say sincerely would like to make things better for their people. But I don't think we can point to any one country in the world and say this country right now is doing something significant to better their country and better the world. This includes Malaysia. I mean, you know, as nice as Malaysia is, I mean, I choose to live in Malaysia because it's one of the nicest countries that I've ever lived in. But still, Malaysia has many problems, and these problems, as I have seen over the years, because I've been coming here for about 15 years now and lived here for the last four and a half, seem to be getting worse, and they seem to be getting worse quickly. So this is why usually there's only two groups of people, two classes of people who would go around and make a claim that they have a plan or an idea that might solve the problems of the world. And hopefully I'm in neither one of those two classes. The two classes of people are basically madmen and con men. Well, you'll have to judge whether or not I'm a madman, but as far as being a con man, I don't have much to gain, so and a lot to lose if I was not being honest. So so we will see. So if I want to say that there is a solution to the problems of the world, one of the things that we really want to know is, why do the problems of the world exist? I mean, and when you see the answer, I mean, a number of you I know have already heard me talk about this before, but when you haven't heard me say what the answer is, and you just get asked the question, why do we have a world that is as bad as it is? I mean, it just seems unbelievable, you know? Allah gave us, at the time of Adam, peace be upon him, a world that was like virtually perfect, you know? It was nice in every way. And now we have made the world not nice in virtually every way. And human society that Allah gave us, He perfected our way of life for us, and told us exactly what to do and what the rewards would be in this world and in the afterlife. And we're not doing it at all, and we're living a life, not all of us, but I mean, I'd say the majority of the world is living a life very much counter to what is right in the world. So it has to be a question, a legitimate question for people to ask. Why is the world that way? And you know, today we have so much information, you know, like on CNN and the internet and newspapers and whatever, that you would think if somebody really clearly knew why the problems of the world exist, that we would all know. But we don't all know, and most people think there's no answer. You know, they say, you know, human beings are just basically bad, which is not the case, of course, or that's just the way it is, or you know, we really don't act like there is a solution. So what I want to say to you is, I'm going to show you not just a solution. There's not an answer to the question, why is the world the way that it is? And so I'm going to show you a very simple answer to why the way the world is as it is. And I think you will see that this answer essentially has to be true. I mean, it is so logically true. There are things you cannot prove. I mean, I can assert and give you an answer to why the world as it is. But that's not a scientific proof, even if I'm right, and even if it is logical. So essentially what I'm going to give you is a logical proof of why the world exists, or why the problems of the world exist. And I'm going to say that the logic of it is so obvious and so clear that you're almost going to have to agree. Now, I won't bother to write them down as I do sometimes, but, well, actually, maybe I will. I mean, you know, we have So we have war, murder, drug sale and abuse, violence, rape, corruption, stealing, pollution, and I could write, you know, another 100 on the board. And these all exist in reasonably large numbers. I mean, how many murders would you guess there are in the whole world in a year? I don't know the exact number, but I'm pretty sure the number is over 1 million. Because in the US alone, there's, I think, over 50,000. So, drug sale and abuse, billions every year. Stealing, billions every year. Then if we add things like alcoholism and you know, you put all of these together, and every year you have billions and billions of these things, and these are some of the worst wrongs, but even the worst wrongs, when you add them all together, they're happening billions of times every year. And how many times should they be happening? You know, the way that Allah planned the world to be, told us the world to be, How many times should these things happen in the world that Allah planned for us? Right? The world, there should be none. And there are billions. So what we have, everything that happens in the world happens on the basis of the bell curve. And roughly 2/3 are going to fall between about here. And then down in this end here, we have this. And in this small end down here are billions. So for some reason or other, and then we have this whole area in here which isn't very good. I mean, this isn't what Allah wants either, right? Allah wants essentially everything This is the area that Allah wants from neutral to the most good. And there is a thing about evil in that evil tends to promote evil. You know, I heard, I won't go into my big story about Christina Aguilera today, but somebody else was mentioned who is in the same, almost in the same class as Christina Aguilera, and that's Britney Spears. And there was somebody on a talk show, and they were saying that they feel very sorry for Britney Spears because when she was a young girl, she didn't have anyone to tell her what was right, and she didn't have anyone guiding her with firm guidance toward what was right. And so, from being a relatively nice young girl on Mickey Mouse Club 10 years or so ago, she ended up being, excuse the term, a somewhat trampy-looking young woman today, who is very well known and very popular among young girls. So she was saying, not only does she feel really sorry for Britney Spears that she didn't have this good guidance, but what is even worse is the fact that Britney Spears did not have this good guidance has now led millions and millions of other girls around the world to emulate the bad things that Britney Spears learned to do, and ways to act and ways to dress, because Britney Spears was not guided in the right direction. So you see how powerful evil can spread. Not that how people dress is the most important thing in the world, but I mean just as one example, how in the 1950s, when I was a teenager, people using drugs were like, well, nobody knew anyone who used drugs, and you know, we heard about it occasionally, but they were like really hardcore people. And by the time I'm in my early 20s, virtually everyone I know is using drugs, partly because of the way music went, and a particular rock group called the Beatles had a very, very big influence on the use of drugs. They have denied some of these things later on, but at the time, there was a song called Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, right? Initials LSD. And that the Beatles on their Sgt. Pepper album claimed they wrote most of their songs on drugs. And they helped. They weren't alone, but they helped popularize a drug culture. And so they just as with Britney Spears, they didn't have anyone to guide them when they were young in a right way. They grew up participating in things that were wrong, but grew up being an influence on hundreds of millions of people in the world, and influencing hundreds of millions of people in a very negative direction. So now we will talk about why. And this is how one individual develops. That when Allah creates a new human being, He links a soul to a human body. And at that moment, that soul is in a state of fitra, or purity. So every single soul that has come into the world, including Britney Spears and the Beatles, and as much as I might regret having to admit it, George Bush, right, came into the world in a state of fitra. Now, Allah has made human beings to be very, very efficient learners, because all of the levels below the human level, Allah took total control over directing them in where He wanted them to go. So all the way from the chimpanzee down to an electron, Allah essentially tells the electron all the way up to the chimpanzee. He tells them what to do, and they do what He tells them. Then when we get to Adam, Allah has a change of plan, because, or not a change of plan, a point has been reached in His plan, where His plan was up until Adam to take total control for the progressive development and the behavior of every one of these stages of material form. Until He gets to Adam, and then He says, now, because of my purposes, as He, or you can say it this way, that He said in the Quran that I have created human beings to be my Khalifah on earth. And the angel said, why would you create as your Khalifah a being who will create mischief and shed blood? And Allah says, because I know what you do not know. Meaning that Allah has a plan, and this is His plan. And His plan is now to create a being who is a learner, who is going to make choices. A chimpanzee and a dog and a fish and a snail and an amoeba and a rock and all of these, they cannot commit a sin because they have no free will. They cannot, no matter what. You know, rock falls on somebody's head and kills them. It's no sin for the rock. It just did what it does, right? Even if you're walking through the jungle and the lion jumps out and eats you, it's not committing a sin. That's what lions do. I mean, that's the way they are made, to do that. So they are just doing what they are supposed to do. But you walk down the street and a human being runs out and hits you with a rock and kills you, the human being has committed a sin, because they are the only ones who can make a choice to do that. We were not created to do that. So Allah has made human beings very, very, I'll use this term, Allah did not make us as machines, but He made us to be like very efficient learning machines, that we learn really, really well. And when we come into the world, the soul does not interact with the physical world directly. It interacts with the physical world through the consciousness. And when the soul is first linked with the consciousness is blank. So it also is in a state of fitra. It is pure. And it is going to have, all through life, from practically the moment of the linking until you die, there are going to be messages written on the consciousness. And there's going to be all sorts of messages, and there's going to be millions and millions of messages. Now, these messages are going to come from three sources of the environment. They're going to come from the physical environment. Like I'm standing here like this, and I can't see behind me, but I know I can do that because I have learned, right? On my consciousness is implanted the information from having stood by the board and seen it when I was looking at it, that there is a board behind me. So I know if I reach back like that, I don't have to see it. I know that it is there. That message is written there from the physical environment. I perceived it, I stored it, and then I used it to know that it was there. But we don't have to worry too much about the inputs from the physical environment. Allah has made us a really nice world, and to the degree human beings do not alter this world in a way to make it harmful, the world stays quite nice. Say, for instance, you come across a book on pornography. You could say, well, that's a physical thing, it's paper and ink. Isn't that paper and ink the physical thing harming you? No, it isn't. The paper and the ink in a book on pornography is not going to do you any damage at all. It is how a human being, how a social influence has manipulated the paper, the ink onto the paper in a certain way that makes it harmful. So it is the social influence from another human being using a physical medium to get into your consciousness. So everything that comes from another human being, whether it is direct or indirect, is a message from the second of the three sources of the environment, the social environment, all the other human beings that exist in the world. It's not just all the other human beings that exist in the world today, it's all the other human beings that have ever existed and their influence on the world. So our art, our history, our philosophy, everything that has come from human beings over the course of history come as a potential to be writing messages in our total past learning history. Now, if that's all we were, and we didn't have this last one, we would just be like the animals. Because without inner speech, you cannot have free will. And it's interesting when right after Allah told the angels that He was going to make human beings His Khalifah on earth, it is almost like a non sequitur, a thing that does not follow. You know, as soon as Allah says, "I know what you do not know," and then it says, "And Allah taught Adam the names of things." And this does not mean that, you know, Allah took Adam around and said, well, this is a whiteboard marker, and this is a chair, and this is a wall. See, this isn't what it means when it says Allah taught Adam the names of things. What it means is Allah taught Adam, or gave Adam, the ability to put names on things. Essentially to have a symbolic language in which to describe the existence around him. And without that symbolic language, which is the inner speech, then there is no possibility of free will. A simple example is you have two chimpanzees walking down a path in the jungle. And one's a great big strong chimpanzee and one's a little weak sick chimpanzee. And there's one banana lying there in the path. Who do you think's going to eat it? Well, of course, the big strong chimpanzee's going to eat it. Because he sees banana, he's hungry, he eats. He doesn't have the ability to have any inner speech and say, oh, I'd kind of like to have that banana, but my friend needs it a lot more than I do, and so I'm going to give it to my friend because, you know, his health and his survival depend on it. For me, it's just another bite of food. So a human being can say those things. A chimpanzee, which is an animal, cannot. That is the difference in free will. So Allah has blessed us with this inner speech, and you'll see later how really, really important it is, because it is exactly this that allows us to be the Khalifah of Allah. If Allah had not given us inner speech or the ability to use a symbolic language, we could not be His Khalifa. Now, so here we have the human being, comes into the world, a empty page, the consciousness, nothing written on it. And influences are going to become, the messages will become coming in and be written in here. Now, there are only two kinds of messages. There are bad messages . So really, there are only two things that can come in to here. Each time a message is written in here, it will either be a bad message or a good message. Now, we know in Islam, and we also know from physics that this is true, that no moment is the same as the one before. So you have a moment here. My finger is indicating a moment. Since no moment can be the same as the one before, the next moment cannot be here. It only has two places then it can be. Because each moment messages are coming in here. I mean, you know, whether we're thinking, no matter what's happening, messages are constantly being written in here. Even if we're not aware of it, messages are being written in here. All day long, messages are being written in here. So, each time a message is written in there, since after the next message is written, it cannot be the same place. There are only two possible places you can be. You can be closer to Allah, or you can be closer to Shaitan. You have a good message, you are closer to Allah. You have a bad message, you are closer to Shaitan. Allah has made us in the world that way. We come into the world in a state of fitra, and then we are going to have messages written in here. Allah gave us Islam as our way of life to give us a society that is like a process of social engineering. That if we lived in a right Islamic society, all of the influences would be directed towards writing. We don't have to worry, like I said, we don't worry much about the physical. In a right Islamic society, every person you go to and everything you see is going to be writing a message in here that is consistent with the will of Allah. So you just keep having good written in there. And the thoughts that you think, right? Islam tells us not only how we should be with others, but Allah tells us what should be going on in our minds and how we should correct wrong thoughts and override them and replace them with good thoughts. And so from the inner speech, we are going to be having good written. In a right Islamic society, in a totally right Islamic society. But we don't live in a totally right Islamic society. We don't live in anything close to that. So we live in a world today that you turn on, you know, you're a young girl or a young boy and you turn on MTV, which we probably shouldn't be turning on, but we live in a world, right, where one of the social influences that exists are a whole lot of television programs that have harmful information. And you watch any one of these programs and they're going to be writing bad messages in there. So you are a young girl, you turn on MTV, you see Christina Aguilera or Britney Spears dressed the way they dress, and you know they're making millions of dollars and the whole world, and they're famous all over the world, and you think, well, they've got to be cool. So the bad messages get written in there, and it is not that there are just a few, right? It's not like we have almost all good Islamic messages written in there. And this is in a relatively nice Islamic country like Malaysia. Right? I mean, consider you live in a totally secular a country like America, what kind of messages are written. So here we have a reasonably nice Islamic country like Malaysia, and do you think the majority of messages being written on the average, even young Muslims' consciousness in Malaysia, do you think the average is more bads or more goods? See, I think more bads right now, right? So and that's it. That's here in Malaysia, in a relatively nice Islamic country. So, and say for instance, and here is this isn't the time to tell you that. I'll just tell you. I won't tell you because later we'll talk about how to teach children to use this process that Allah has given us to stop the negative influences having power over them and to increase the positive influences having power over them. But unfortunately, what we have today is the average human being across the planet has a whole lot of bad messages and a few good. Messages saying, not that they're officially haram yet, but I'm sure they will be in not too long. Messages saying smoking cigarettes is cool, drinking alcohol is okay, using drugs is okay, promiscuous sex is okay, dressing immodestly is okay. And then, as weird as it seems that this could be possible, you get people who are thinking war is okay. I mean, somehow George Bush, in his consciousness, you know, he came in a state of fitra with a pure consciousness to be written on. He thinks it's okay to send the most sophisticated military hardware there has ever been over to countries where people are living in mud huts and just kill them by the hundreds and the thousands. And he has no qualms at all about doing that, because the messages written in his consciousness say it is okay. And the people around him, the messages in their consciousness, say it is okay. Murder? Well, if we have millions of murders in the world every year, that means millions of people have had messages written in their consciousness saying murder is okay. Drug sale and abuse happening probably in the whole world at least hundreds of millions of times every day, every single day, which means hundreds of millions of people have messages written in there saying that is okay. Same thing with violence, rape, corruption, stealing, and pollution. All of these things are happening because people in the world have these messages written in their consciousness saying all of those things are okay. Now this is one human being, right? I just diagrammed how one human being is. But we, say for, I don't know how many people there are in the world now, the number's growing so fast, but just say for instance there's 7 billion. And we have 7 billion people in the world. Each one of them has one of these with the messages written in it. And so if you put all of the messages of 7 billion people's consciousness together, you end up with a world consciousness. The consciousness of world society. That is just like this. Mainly bad messages with a few goods. So it is absolutely impossible to have a world like we have today that is writing the messages, right, for all of those bad behaviors that are happening. They are happening because messages got written in there saying those things are okay. That means we have a world that writes those messages, right, onto the world consciousness. As long as we have a world that is writing those messages onto the consciousness of the individuals in the world, all of those problems must exist. We cannot, all of these various terrible things absolutely have to exist. All of these things have to exist if we have a a world that is writing these messages on the consciousness of individuals as they are developing. I mean, you cannot have these messages being written unless you have these. If you want to get rid of these, you have to get rid of these messages. Now, does that seem very logical that that is why the problems in the world exist? I mean, it is almost undeniable that that is why the problems in the world exist. I mean, why we write, we haven't addressed yet the question, which is a more tough question, why does the world write so many bad messages? That's another question. But basically, the answer to why all these terrible problems exist in the world is because we live in a world society that conditions people to do all of these bad things. It teaches people that it is okay to do all of these bad things. Is there anyone who does not see the logic of this, or is there anyone who does not consider this a sufficiently logical answer? Because I said I would tell you why the problems that exist in the world exist. Does this seem like a sufficient logical answer as to why the problems in the world exist? I mean, it just has to be. It just, you know, it really is. You just look at the world and it is that way. So, once you know what the problems of the world are, obviously then you might want a solution. Well, the solution then becomes a really obvious one, doesn't it? I mean, is there anyone then who doesn't know the solution to get rid of all these? Say you want to get rid of all of these. Is there anyone here who doesn't know what you have to do to get rid of all of those? So no one raised their hand. I'm assuming everybody knows, right? Well, no, I mean, you do know. You have to stop these messages being written in there. And there's no other way. I mean, you can't have a society that's going to have these messages and not have those problems. If you have a society that is having if that is the society if this is the sum total of the consciousness of all of humanity, and this is the influence, and this is the messages that have been written in by the three sources of the environment, summed up for all of humanity, all of those problems are going to be gone. See, you cannot do one of those things with all these messages in here. Whatever is in here is going to determine your every action. Your every physical action, your every thought, your every word, and your every thought is going to be determined by what is in here. If you have bad messages in there, you'll have bad physical actions, you'll have bad words, and you'll have bad thoughts. If you have only good messages in there, you'll have only good physical actions, good words, and good thoughts. I mean, so it is, in a way, as simple as that. The thing that is not simple is how do you get from where we are now to this? And these messages, of course, non-Muslims might not feel so happy to realize yet that this is true, although one day I think there will be no non-Muslims, so everyone will be happy. But every good message is a message from Allah. I mean, there's no such thing as a good message that is not from Allah. Right? And a good message is not just be nice to people. I mean, that's one kind of good message. But 2 + 2 = 4, that's a good message. Right? So that's from Allah. 2 + 2 = 5 is a bad message. Right? So we don't want that written in people's consciousness, because people who think 2 + 2 = 5, I don't want them building the house I'm going to live in. You know, so I mean, in everything, every single good message that is possible in the whole universe is a message from Allah. And Allah gives us the opportunity and has given us a way of life and has told us about what a right society is, what right business principles are, what right spiritual practices are, what right family practices are, what right sexual relations are, what right what right warfare is. Right? He has told us all of those things to do right. And unfortunately, we live in a world where we're not doing them. And I don't want to sound like some extremist fundamentalist, you know, Muslim preaching whatever their scared people are preaching, but there is no other message to say. You know, there's no other message really but this. If we want to have a right world, we have to have a right Islamic world. We can have a lot of nice things from Christianity, we can have a lot of nice things from Buddhism, we can have a lot of nice things from the Hindus, right? They all have nice things in their religions, but we cannot have only right messages written in there. So the only way to have eventually to have a world with only right messages in there is essentially to have a world where eventually every single thing that is not what Allah wants is eliminated from the world. Every single thing that Allah wants, if it doesn't already exist, it has to be made to exist in the world. So that is what we have to do. Yes, sister.
Can I ask you a question there? Does that mean that, like, you're saying that if it's good messages or action, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that if the persons got bad messages, that they would be behaving badly, would it? Because there's some people who do have bad messages, but they don't act bad. So,
What they have bad messages and they don't act bad.
But they have bad messages, but they don't act it out. Like they don't, you know, they still do good.
No, well, I mean, I know what you mean, but I'm in total disagreement. Well, it's just not the reality of the world. I mean, I may have in my mind people I don't like, I would like to kill, right? But I don't act on it. Maybe, you know. So if that's the kind of example of what you're doing, I'm saying that's not a good message to have in there, because there is a thing that takes place which is called generalization. And I'm not going to be, one of the things that we're supposed to do in Islam is we're supposed to be having good feelings toward our brothers and sisters, and even toward non-Muslims if they are not bothering us. And so, therefore, I am more, even though I am not physically acting in a bad way, I am mentally acting in a way opposed to the will of Allah. So it really comes down to that. And in the second half of today's talk, we will discuss a little bit about how you start to change this. And then, because it really does have to be changed. I mean, there's two alternatives for the future of the world, right? Either we change the messages that are written in there, or we don't. If we don't change the messages written in there, they're not going to get better on their own. There's a thing in psychology called behavioral drift, and it's very much like in physics the concept of entropy. You may not understand this, but those of you who know a little bit of physics may understand what I'm going to say. That if you have a closed system with no energy coming into, no new energy coming into that closed system, that system is going to move toward chaos. Okay, this is what entropy is about. The same thing is true in the individual and in society. If we are not putting energy in to ourselves individually to move in a positive direction or to move toward Allah, or as a society, if we are not making our society, putting energy in to make our society better, it does not just stay there, right? No moment is the same as the one before. You put energy in, you can move toward Allah. You put no energy in, you can drift. But you can only drift one way. You don't drift toward Allah, right? You can only drift toward shaitan. So shaitan here is at an advantage in a way. Shaitan can say to people, and I'm sure it does in many subtle ways, you want to be a good Muslim, or you want to be a good person and follow God, God makes it hard for you. You've got to do this and you've got to do that. And, you know, you have to do, you have to do, you have to do. But with me, I'm your really good friend, you know. I make it really easy for you. You want to come to me, just do nothing, and you will come to me. And that is Shaitan's advantage. And Shaitan is using that, of course, very, very powerfully right now. In the world today, I would say, since there's two choices, and everything everyone does every day is either taking them to Shaitan, to Allah or to Shaitan, I would say there are many more trips down than there are many more trips up to Allah going on every day at the moment. And the world will just keep getting worse and worse until it is so bad. One of the potentials is that Allah would give it, since He has given us the free will and told us we must use it, and He has told us that you know, several things. Allah has told us that if you look around and you see a whole lot of things you don't like, don't blame me. Blame yourselves for not living the life I told you to live, right? That's where we're at right now. We're looking around, we're seeing all sorts of things we don't like. No blame on Allah, right? If we had lived the life that He has told us to live, it wouldn't be that way. The other one is, Allah has told us, if you're waiting for me to make things right for you, don't bother. I'm not going to make them right for you. But as soon as you do what it takes to make things right for yourself as an individual or for society, I will make sure you are justly rewarded and that right will come about. So that is the first half of today's talk, and we will take 15 minutes for a break, and I think there are some refreshments, I'm not sure. And please try and be back by 4 o'clock sharp on time, and we'll talk about some possible ways to work on solutions. Thank you.